Welcome to the Climate Conscious Podcast. I am your host, Derval Barzey. Today, I'm joined by Cytandra Hoover. Welcome, Cytandra.
Thank you, Derval. It's so nice to be here.
Cytandra Hoover is a transformative global leader, renowned for adeptly addressing complex issues and driving change across over 60 countries, combining strategic acumen with anthropological insights to consistently deliver lasting value. As a pioneering business intelligence innovator, Cytandra excels in harmonizing diverse perspectives, revealing concealed profit opportunities, and propelling social change. So, Cytandra, you're a global social impact and insurance consultant. And I must say that's a very exciting title. Can you tell us about your background and what led you into this role?
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me on today. It really is a joy and a pleasure to be here. So as a bit of my background, I grew up with a father who is a tropical botanist. And so I grew up seeing and experiencing and traveling all over the world with him and really seeing the effects of climate change very close hand. And so that impacted not only my interest and passion in protecting the environment and environmental sustainability, but also the anthropological and cultural side of the various countries that we visited. And that really informed the rest of my life ever since I was very young. And so I went and spent about the first 10 years of my career working in international development, human migration, disaster response and conflict management with the UN and USAID programs all across the globe. After finishing that workup, I then went and pursued my MBA, and then I spent the last decade or so working in formal insurance. I left that about a year ago and then wanted to bring together the various skills and experiences that I had gained with this innate calling to do well in the world and to make the world a more humane place and a safer and more just place for all. And so that really led me to this space of combining my background in social impact with insurance and MBA and a background in microfinance. And so here I am working in inclusive insurance and love this space of really figuring out how to find that intersection between impact, inclusion, and profit.
I can definitely relate to that innate calling to do well in the world. And I'm so glad that, you found your sweet spot, as we say, in inclusive insurance.
Thanks.
So as world leaders are currently meeting at the UN Climate Change Conference, COP28, to negotiate collective action to limit global warming to below 1.5 degrees. The Caribbean is particularly concerned about impacts of rising global temperatures, such as extreme weather events and sea level rise. So, in the face of increasing climate vulnerability, how does inclusive insurance facilitate sustainable change to enhance equity and also boost resilience?
I love this question. I think this is one of my favorite questions in the space of inclusive insurance for multiple reasons. One is insurance has traditionally focused much more on response, on the reaction side when an event happens. But I truly believe, especially in this space of inclusive insurance around natural disasters and climate change, the focus really is on resilience. How do we prevent the events from happening, whether it's from the natural side or protecting the vulnerable populations from the impacts of those natural events? And so from my experience and the various companies that I have been associated with, I think one critical area really is that focus on how to provide services to traditionally marginalized and vulnerable populations that are commonly known as the uninsured. So populations that don't currently have access to or understand insurance or use insurance products. And so within that space, I think that there is a huge opportunity. They are the ones that are the most greatly impacted by climate change and the effects of climate change. And so being able to reach them, whether that is through insurance products that focus on the reparation of damaged property as a result of natural disasters or income loss as a result. But then again, really on that focus of resiliency, right? How can you make populations, how can you help those vulnerable and marginalized populations be more resilient before the disasters strike? And that can really be in a myriad of different ways. But, it's not just abroad or in the Caribbean, right? Although those are definitely populations that are most greatly impacted, but it's even in developed countries like the United States or Europe, where we are really seeing the impacts of climate vulnerability.
Absolutely. And we're seeing more and more that the impacts are unfolding, definitely in the global south, but also in the global north as well.
Absolutely. And I think what's really interesting is that traditionally the idea of climate resiliency and the impacts of climate change on vulnerable populations has much more focused on the global south. And the truth is, right, that really is where the majority of the world population is that's impacted by climate change. But I think the fact that we're starting to see in the global north and Europe and the United States and Canada, really where climate change is impacting in our backyards, hopefully that is bringing more awareness to the need to develop innovative solutions and inclusive insurance products that can be used across the globe to help to protect the populations and provide that resiliency so that there is not such a great impact when these natural disasters are striking at greater frequency.
So, Cytandra, you mentioned the uninsured and access to and understanding of insurance and the ability to reach these populations. And when we're speaking about climate change, it's important that we recognize that depending on where you live, your socioeconomic status, your race, and even your gender, the impact of climate change can be magnified.
Yes.
And in adapting to climate change, no one should be left behind. So how do you see insurance programs being able to address the unique challenges faced by vulnerable and marginalized communities?
Such a good question. I think one area that is of critical importance really is in education and information. In the global north, as you mentioned, insurance products, the myriad of insurance products is very well known. On both the pro and the con side of the types of services and goods that are protected and how insurance works and how you access it and how you purchase it, et cetera. But when you're talking about inclusive insurance products, especially when you move away from the traditionally insured products like property, it really is a different conversation. And I think that to me is a critical part of it, is really being able to articulate what the problem is and what the solution is that inclusive insurance products can solve, and that how it can be able to address the income gap and the vulnerability that people face during climate change events. And I think being able to really articulate that it's not just a scheme to take money, but that it really shows where the payout is, and that it really shows how the claims process and the gap that is filled after a natural disaster is really critical. Because one of the things that we do hear a lot in this space of inclusive insurance is that people do not want to buy the products because of the negative reputation of insurance. And so I think focusing on education is a really key component to be able to show and to explain and demonstrate when the claims payouts have been made, so that people really see this as a valuable product that can help to provide that resiliency and that support in that great time of crisis.
You hinted at the pros and cons of insurance. The average person might think of insurance as a necessary evil that is there to bring some form of relief after something bad happens.
Mm-hmm.
But how can we shift from it being a reactive measure to it being a proactive solution?
I think there are numerous ways, right? The first one is I'm a data nerd. I love data. I love analysis. I love being able to find correlations between data on a global scale. And so insurance companies have access to a massive amount of information. Being able to leverage and utilize that is a tool and an insight that I think we still have not quite captured yet. One of the challenges with inclusive insurance in more traditionally lower income countries is the access to information. However, being able to leverage the information that is known, even if it's in other geographies, can really help us to be able to understand where resiliency opportunities exist. I'll give you a perfect example. As we know, earlier this year, the state of Florida in the United States was hit by one hurricane after another that were some of the largest hurricanes in the history of the United States. By being able to understand what the trajectory of those hurricanes are and the damage that was done to properties, we can then be able to understand what kind of structures could be built that are more resilient to environmental impacts. And so there are some very innovative models that are coming out with regards to housing that really focus on how to build more sustainable housing, whether that's on how to maintain the access to electricity during hurricane and excess rain events, or the building structures so that they're more resilient against water that is entering the properties, or being able to lift properties off the ground so that they're not sitting in standing water. But there are numerous examples that exist that we really could be able to apply in other contexts and environments, and even in areas that don't have access to high amount of capital. But it really is focusing on those solutions on how to protect the populations and understanding what the risks are in each one of the individual locations and countries with the specific events, so that we can really try to make sure that those populations are more resilient to the climatic events.
And in terms of innovation and technology, what areas do you believe need more attention as we adapt to the changing landscape of climate impacts?
One, as I mentioned, education. And so I think within education, that also comes early warning systems. So the ability to provide faster awareness and faster alerts that the disasters are imminent. I think a second area, as I mentioned, is that education on what insurance products really are and the use of innovative technologies to reach communities that really are outside of large urban areas that are in rural populations, and being able to reach those community members so that they really have access to the understanding of how inclusive insurance products can protect them and their goods, their services, their income during times of interruption. I think another area really is in the space of claims payout, right? It's very hard to get people to pay into a policy and to buy an insurance policy to begin with. But if you don't have a fast way to make the payout in an expeditious way, it unfortunately just refeeds the cycle and the sentiment that insurance really is not beneficial. And so I think being able to use digital money options, and other payout mechanisms that really can be able to get the claims payout as fast as possible. I think it also goes to what the methodology is around how the payments happen, and being able to use and think of insurance rather than from the perspective of very specific claims adjusting, which really requires a lot of resources to understand what the exposure is and how much needs to be paid. And so really using innovation to rethink what the cost, what the payment needs to be so that we can get the funds to the impacted individuals as quickly as possible. I think those are just a few of the ways in which insurance can really be helping to move the needle and protect vulnerable populations during climate change.
I think in our efforts to become sustainable and resilient, it really forces us to rethink our models for everything, insurance included, and being open to disrupting what may have worked in the past. But definitely we are living in a different world, and we anticipate that even our future would look different. So we definitely need to be open to being creative, to being collaborative, and of course, being innovative.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think along those lines, oftentimes it's more fun for the people developing products to create very sophisticated packages, right? Of the pricing models and the covered perils or the property or the goods that are covered. And so I think sometimes really simplicity is actually our best friend. That especially when talking about climate change and vulnerable marginalized populations, I think simplicity and finding almost like the path of least resistance. We'll never get perfection and we will never have access to all of the data. And I think sometimes making it more simple in terms of what is underwritten and how it's underwritten and how you pay it out and who is protected, I think sometimes can allow the possibility to actually protect more people than in traditional approaches, which require so much more information.
Do you wonder if your compostable trash bags are really better for the environment?
Do you want to live more sustainably but don't want to break the bank on expensive reusable Ziploc bags?
Do you want to try DIY dishwashing detergent but actually need the stuff to work?
Join us on Greening Up My Act. We're Tiff
and Kat,
two marketing writers who investigate potential greenwashing,
or green hooey as we call it,
behind popular products and services.
Find us at www.greeningupmyact.com or wherever you get your podcasts.
So with this new model of insurance, and when it comes to social impact enterprises in general, how do you strike a balance between the money and the mission?
That's such a great question. And it really ties to my own personal mission, which I say is working at the intersection of impact, inclusion, and profit. So it's looking at that double and oftentimes triple bottom line approach. And while it's, I think, very easy to see the two at ends, can't have both of them. You have to choose one or the other. I actually do not believe it's true. I think you can actually generate even greater profit by thinking of mission and the social impact that is achieved in the means. One of the areas that I particularly focus on is the business setup and the business structure. I think it's critical to understand what is the mission and what are the indicators and those metrics that you are trying to achieve. And if, for example, the one of your metrics is the number of people that is benefited, the amount of money that you're paying out, how you're reducing the resiliency. Again, being able to really articulate very clear, SMART-based objectives and indicators that you are tying your business model to, and then being able to back up from that and figure out what is the business model and the structure that you can put in place to achieve that. And there are many ways in which businesses can still achieve the mission and those indicators while also making money. And it goes along, how the spending your money internally, the business structures that you set up, how you look at partnerships, and really being able to find those areas of what I call the hidden profit layer within a company, finding out where those areas of efficiency are in process optimization, in resource optimization and allocation, and being able to leverage resources in unique and creative ways so that you can achieve the indicators while also having a very streamlined and efficient organization. I think one of the big challenges with social enterprises as the passion behind wanting to do good. And that is fantastic. And we need that, right? And that is why all of us are working in this space, because we want to do good. Sometimes that desire to do good has and steers us more to the focus of that impact and takes us away from the efficiency and the optimization model, right? And takes us away from how do we run this as a business in the most streamlined manner possible. That doesn't mean that we are underfunding. It doesn't mean that we are cutting corners. It doesn't mean that we're not allocating capital to the areas that need to be allocated, that need to be invested in. It's much more about that strategic thought process of where is the inefficiency? Where are we losing the money along the way? Where are the opportunities that we can really build a very streamlined and efficient model? Because any time that we're able to reduce the expense in the business structure, that's more money that can then be invested in actually doing more good. And so to me, that's really where the balance is. And that's what I love to do, is kind of serving in this role of a combination of chief strategy officer, chief financial officer, chief operations officer, bring strategic finance, bring all of that together to really think of how to build the most streamlined business model. So at the end of the day, there's actually more capital left over that can be invested into the mission and achieving those indicators and achieving those metrics and goals.
I love that you mentioned balancing impact, inclusion, and profit.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think sometimes in this space, it may come across that you have to be an NGO or a not-for-profit to operate in the sustainability space. Mm-hmm. But I have the view that, with a bit more effort and some more creativity, we can develop sustainable business models.
Yes.
Yeah. So we really need more persons like you, Cytandra, spreading the gospel of sustainable businesses and impactful social enterprises.
It's such a good point. And, I've worked with, as both an employee and volunteer in so many different capacities with NGOs and other nonprofit and intergovernmental organizations. And they do have an incredibly important place, and space to play and place to make an impact. The challenge that I have found with this space, and it's certainly not a criticism at all, it's just the reality, is that because of the dynamic of fundraising, it really is tied to the grants and the donations that is received. And when those dry up, it makes it very difficult to create a sustainable business model. And I've seen time and time again, and really where it breaks my heart is where investment had been placed in creating models and creating solutions. And then when the funding dries up, the program is no longer available. And then you're not able to continue that impact. And it really is not sustainable. And so that is why for me particularly, I'm really interested in the for-profit model to social problems, because I think being able to create viable for-profit business solutions is a way to be able to invest in that sustainable impact. And I really think that oftentimes this really is where partnerships and that relationship between the nonprofit and for-profit come together. And I think, historically there had been this gigantic chasm between the two, right? NGOs were all do-gooders, right? They're not based on efficient business models, right? What all the stereotypes are. And then, the other side, right? If you're for profit, it's capitalistic and all you care about is money. And I think finally we're starting to see those two silos being broken down. And I like to talk about how we now live in this world of intersected Venn diagrams, right? Of being able to bring together what didn't traditionally appear to be synergistic dimensions, but really being able to find where that common space is. And so I really like this space of the intersection of impact, inclusion, and profit, because it really can bring together different models and approaches and solutions that have worked in different areas through both for-profit and nonprofit models, but through partnerships and innovation, we can bring them together and leverage them in creative new ways. And again, I think simplicity really is key to be able to apply them in new contexts so that we can help to not only protect more people, but be responsive to more people, to involve and include more people in the process so that, the great income divide doesn't continue to grow. So obviously I get very passionate about this topic.
Yes. And when I think about it, the Climate Conscious podcast operates at the nexus of nonprofit and the private sector space. And it's like a facilitator or a connector where we can bring all important stakeholders together. But definitely, I think the impact, as you said, is more sustainable and it is stronger when there's collaboration.
Yes, absolutely. And I've spent my entire life and my entire career, either directly or indirectly, working in this space of partnerships. And it also kind of is where my hat of an anthropologist comes in and wanting to understand culture and people. And I really think that is where there is so much opportunity. Is there are so many companies that are out there that have found fantastic solutions to niche problems, right? And so how can we identify those companies and bring those solutions and approaches, combine them with other entities, and be able to apply them into other contexts, right? Like, I think innovation is fantastic. I think oftentimes we equate innovation to a new solution, that it needs to be something new. I think that innovation also can be taking existing solutions and tailoring them or tweaking them or combining them with other approaches and being able to use them in very creative ways. And I think that's also innovation as well, but it's not as sexy. So it's not, often as talked about, but I think it's even, honestly, I think it's more important. I think it's equally as important because a lower barrier to entry and lower resource allocation that's really required to be able to bring more people along in the journey and create more, resiliency and impact for vulnerable populations, due to, changes that are completely outside of their control.
Cytandra, this has been a really great conversation. And I want to thank you for joining me today to share some insights on inclusive insurance and its ability to enhance equity and boost climate resilience. You've shared some relevant solutions for both the global North and the global South context, as well as highlighting the value that exists at the intersection of impact, inclusion, and profit. As we conclude today's episode, I'd love to hear from you. What would make the world a better place?
I think at a very simplistic way, it's empathy and compassion. I think as a result of a myriad of factors between technology and social media and COVID, et cetera, the world has become a very polarized place. And that polarization and breakdown of a lot of community structures, I think makes it very easy to live in a world of us versus them, to see more of our differences than of our similarities. And so I think that really being able to focus on the humanistic side, that we're all human and we all bring value to the world, and being able to appreciate those differences rather than fear them or reject them really will help to make the world a better place. And so I think being opening to listening and learning and leveraging that knowledge makes us all better human beings that in change can then make this world better. And so that's really the principle that I live by.
That's such a beautiful response, Cytandra. So how can listeners connect with you?
Sure. LinkedIn is probably the best one. It's where I'm most active. Cytandra Hoover. I'm the only Cytandra, so it makes it pretty easy to find me. I have a website, b3c-global.com. And I'm sure that there'll be, some other, spaces as well, yet to come. But, LinkedIn is probably the best starting place.
So, guys, connect with Cytandra on LinkedIn and also the Climate Conscious podcast. Thank you.
Thank you. And I look forward to connecting with your listeners. And, you know, I love to learn. And so I love to connect with other people. And so would love to hear from any of you as well of, you know, other ideas or solutions that you may have and how we could collaborate.
Thank you for joining us for another episode of the Climate Conscious podcast. We'd love to hear from you. Write to us at theclimateconscious@gmail.com or simply leave a review on your favorite app. Remember to follow The Climate Conscious on all social media platforms. See you next week.